The Chesapeake Bay, the largest estuary in the United States and widely recognized as a national treasure. The Chesapeake watershed region spans 64,000 square miles, including parts of 6 states and the District of Columbia. More than 150 rivers and streams drain into the Chesapeake Bay. The bay is home to a diverse range of plants and animals, including over 300 species of fish and a variety of shellfish and crab species. Despite its natural beauty and ecological importance, this vast national treasure faces serious threats. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency continues to list the Chesapeake Bay on its dirty waters list. The Chesapeake watershed region is home to over 17 million people, and the delicate balance of maintaining environmental harmony between the area's plant, animal, and human species has proved to be a challenge. Farms, factories, cities, and suburbs have caused a great deal of pollution to the bay in recent years. These environmental challenges facing the Chesapeake Bay require intensive research and innovative solutions. The University of Maryland has served as a key center of activity in monitoring the bay's health and contributing new ideas to improve the quality of its waters. No other university does more to study and protect the bay than the University of Maryland. In fact, a recent report called the University of Maryland the most influential institution in the world in the field of environmental and ecological economics. What's next for the bay? And more importantly, how can we ensure that the Chesapeake Bay remains the healthy and vibrant heart of the state of Maryland? This is Research Matters, the Chesapeake Bay.
Welcome to Research Matters. I'm Don Kettle, Dean of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, and your host for this program. Today we've gathered some of the university's most thoughtful experts on environmental science to talk about one of the things that ties together all Marylanders, the Chesapeake Bay. Our panelists are Douglas Lipton, Program Leader of Maryland's Sea Grant Extension and an economist who's an expert on the things that live in the Bay, Lori Lynch, Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. As part of her university service, she works with the state to improve the health of the Bay, and Tony Busalaki, Director of the Earth Systems Science Interdisciplinary Center and a professor in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science, now the chair of the university's new Council on the Environment. Now, nothing says Maryland like the Chesapeake Bay, and nothing says the Bay like blue crabs. There's some really good news here. The number of blue crabs has tripled in the last 5 years to a 14-year high. Doug, you spend about as much time in the Bay and around it as anybody. What's the story here? Is there good news?
Well, there is good news, but one has to be cautious in overinterpreting it. So the numbers are definitely up. This year was one of the highest numbers on record for amount of crabs in the Bay. But the word of caution is around the number of female crabs. They're down a little bit. And it's the female spawning crabs that are the ones that are going to produce the crabs in the future. So we expect a good year for watermen and crabs this year, but we have to remain cautious that we preserve those females and allow them to spawn, contribute to the population in years to come.
And Lori, you've worked with the state on state programs to try to encourage this for a long time. You know firsthand the kind of progress we're making. What do you think about this?
Well, one of the projects that I worked on a lot and my research has focused on is adopting conservation practices on farms. And we exceeded our goal of adopting riparian buffers, very rapidly. And actually then all the states in the Chesapeake Bay area decided to set an even more extensive goal. And while we're not meeting that goal as quickly, we're seeing a lot of progress to people doing the riparian buffers, and that is one of the ways that we can keep the nutrients, one of the big polluters of the bay, out of the water.
What does that have to do with the crabs, and how does the effect of the nutrients in the water affect the health of the crabs?
Well, the nutrients tend to, they come into the water, they make the seagrasses grow rapidly, they deplete the oxygen, and then that creates an environment where the crabs have a hard time surviving, as well as other aquatic species.
And Doug, what effect does that have on the crabs themselves then?
Yeah, well, and just, Laurie said seagrasses, but the phytoplankton growing excessively, and then when they decompose, it takes the oxygen out of the water in the decomposition process. What that does then is these crabs need oxygen, like we all do, to survive, and then they become stressed. And if things go to no oxygen or very low oxygen, they can even die, and we can have big crab die-offs.
Tony, you really look at the big picture issues. Can you step back and tell us a little bit more about what you think is going on? What's the big story on the Bay here?
Well, the Bay is almost a natural laboratory or a microcosm of the multiple stressors that the Earth system as a whole is undergoing. Things like changes in climate, sea level rise, urban sprawl, changes in nutrient loading, all coming together to affect the Bay, and we see this repeated in many places around the world. And so we have the responsibility to really study this in the sort of Earth systems approach and looking at these multiple stressors.
As we saw in our introductory piece, there's probably no university that does more for the Bay than the University of Maryland. And let's talk a little bit about the way that each of your research pieces helps to contribute to our understanding of this. Lori, a lot of what you've been working on is the contribution of good management of farmland to the health of the Bay. And talk about a little bit about your research and what impact do you think that has?
Well, I actually have been focusing on two things. One is good management of the farmland and putting on things like cover crops in the winter. But I also look at just maintaining our farmland. You were mentioning, one of the concerns that we have in the Bay is the urban sprawl. People are using more land per person to build homes, and that's causing a lot of impervious surface, basically the roofs and the driveways, the roads that they have, and that means that we end up with stormwater in the Bay. And one of the things the Chesapeake Bay program has been trying to do is get 20% of the resource lands in the Bay and Maryland, 1 million acres, preserved to stay as farmer forests for the rest of time. And so I look a lot at those programs, and I try to analyze which programs work the best and how we can be the most efficient to preserve farmland and have it there for our children and our grandchildren.
And part of the effort to try to get the larger piece of this is out at M Squared, the university's own research park. And Tony, we have some big news about what's happening out there.
So actually quite pleased to announce that later this year, the National Center for Weather and Climate Prediction, part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, will be moving in across the street from us. And so 830 of the world's leading weather and climate scientists will be moving to the University of Maryland campus. And together, when you consider our breadth of faculty in the environmental sciences and the fact that the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center is just 5 miles down the road, arguably, we have one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of Earth scientists anywhere in the world.
That's remarkable. I mean, one of the largest concentrations anywhere. And what impact do you think that's likely to have on the way that research operates, both here at the university and more broadly around the country as a result of this?
Well, I think one of the things is, first and foremost, training that next generation of Earth and environmental scientists that are cognizant of the problems that Doug and Lori are referring to. So it's our responsibility to respond to what society is asking us to do and help solve these very urgent and pressing problems.
So when you talk about impact, you're talking about not only the impact in research, impact on training new students, and impact on the way that policy is made just down the road in Washington as well.
It's bringing them all together, going from basic research, applied research, applying that research, developing products, and in support of informed policy and investment decisions.
Terrific. Doug, what does this mean for our friends, the crabs and the oysters who live at the bottom of the Bay? How is this going to have any kind of real impact in the long haul?
Well, it will have. I mean, one of the things that Tony's sort of describing is these collaborations across agencies and different disciplines, and then Lori describing collaborations with our state government and even local and county governments, making decisions that are based on science. So if we can use that horsepower that we're getting here in this region and really get the research questions answered, we have the mechanism to work with these partners to get the kind of policies that Lori was talking about in terms of land preservation, the kinds of things that I work on better policies for managing blue crab in the Bay, managing the watermen and helping them be a viable enterprise without harming the blue crab population and its longevity.
Let's talk about those two things. First, the kind of impact on the people out there whose lives matter and depend on the Bay, and the way that policymakers can affect them. How can our research connect with them?
Well, I'll just give you a quick example. One of the things I've been working on over the last year is the idea with the blue crab that we just had too much fishing effort, too many fishing pots in the bay, too many fishermen. It was unsustainable. And so it's always hard to get fishermen out of the industry. That doesn't sound like a good thing. We're trying to create jobs. But we had an opportunity working with the federal government to buy back fishing licenses from fishermen. So we work with the state, the agency that manages the blue crab resource, and we came up with a very efficient mechanism of buying back licenses from fishermen who probably had more opportunities to do other things. And we bought back over 1,000 licenses. And this is going to help, again, the long-term sustainability of the blue crab.
And Lori, you've been spending a lot of time working directly with state government officials on these issues as well.
Yes, so we also were looking at a mechanism to preserve the farmland at the most affordable price, to really compensate the landowners for what they're giving up, their right to develop the land into houses, but also to not bankrupt the government in the process. And early on, the AREC department at the University of Maryland designed a way to evaluate the agricultural value. And now the state wants to go back and revisit it. And so they asked us to come in and help them do that analysis one more time 30 years later. And so that's the kind of thing that I participate in all the time, where you just help them figure out the best way to design a program or how to do it the most cost efficient. I know that for a lot of us, we think that there's one pristine farm out there that we should preserve, and it doesn't matter that it costs, $10 million. Whereas an economist like myself thinks, well, you have to look at the benefits of that one farm versus maybe the 10 other farms that you could preserve and that many more acres and prime soils, et cetera. And you have to take the cost of doing any one particular action into account. And sometimes that's hard when you're in the Department of Natural Resources and you just see this beautiful farm or this beautiful forest that you want to take to preserve forever.
Tony, one of the things that this new Council on the Environment at the university is going to be doing is trying to find a way to bring all this together, but also to bring it to life in the classroom in an effort to try to help train the kind of employees that this state needs to try to engage in the most kind of economic growth for the long term. Can you talk a little bit about how you think that's going to happen?
So again, the Chesapeake Bay is really an entity that cuts across every single college here at the University of Maryland. And so we want to be bringing those students, not just within the stovepipes, within a particular department or college, but bridge across the physical, the natural, the social sciences, architecture, engineering, and business, because if we're going to ultimately solve the problems of the Bay, our students need to have an appreciation for all these different sectors that are impacting the Bay.
So we've got the situation where we're going to have the largest concentration of research scientists in the world. We're going to be training students to engage with them, and we're going to combine both in an effort to try to have real impact on national policy to create jobs and make the kind of science and our friend the crabs happier.
That's correct, Don. It's a challenging problem, but also it's a problem that we have to take on, an exciting one at that.
Fascinating.
It is really exciting also to be in Maryland because we have politicians who will listen to what we said. Like Doug was saying, I mean, it's like there really is the outreach from the politicians to the research and from the research to the politicians, and they will implement programs, and then they'll let us analyze them, and then they'll listen to what we find in terms of whether or not they work.
Yeah.
Don, I just wanted to add, build on what Tony was saying about educating these students. I teach a course that's targeted at freshmen and sophomores on the Chesapeake Bay. Basically, Tony just described my course about how it integrates across sciences. But I get the students when they're early in their careers, and they don't know that they want to be earth scientists and so on. So we get them interested in a topic that they care about and say, this is pretty interesting. Now, some of them may come and be economists like Lori and myself, but I think a lot of them get interested in the sciences that are underneath all of what we're talking about. So I think we have a really good setup here to take advantage of this, the new group coming to M².
And part of what you're describing is that research isn't just something that happens in labs behind closed doors with white-coated professors either.
That's correct, and I bring the actual research, whether it's myself, and I have a lot of guest lecturers come in and say, I'm doing this today. I'm going out and doing this study, this research, I'm pulling down this satellite data or something like that, and they present it, and the students get real excited about it.
Terrific. Now for the segment of the show we're calling Grades. We're a university, right? So let me ask each of you to grade the current efforts to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. Doug, let me start with you.
Well, I get the first shot, but I'll tell you, I'm going to have to give an incomplete. That may seem like a cop-out, but the reason I'm going to do that is that we've made tremendous progress in the last couple of years with these new watershed implementation plans that are designed to help clean up the bay, but they haven't actually been implemented. So it's like your students in your class, they've got a term project and they're giving you an outline and you're grading that along the way. You say, you know, you're doing pretty well, you're on track, keep it up and you'll get a good grade. But I haven't seen that final product yet, and it's not going to be for another year or so, so I'm giving it incomplete. I'll give a B for the work so far, but that's only counting for about 20% of their overall grade in the class. So the other 80,
midterm grade a B.
Yeah, that would be about right.
Okay. Lori.
Yeah, I'm on the people side, and I believe you should give positive points rather than take away from their total score. And I didn't agree with the Wall Street Journal that the Bay should get a D+. I feel like people really love the Bay, and there's been a lot of effort on parts of local, county, state, federal government to do things for the Bay. I mean, from a science perspective, we're not there yet, so we can't give it an A, but the D+ also doesn't bode with me. So I think I would say B-.
B-. So incomplete, a B-. Tony?
C-,
Okay.
based on the end results to date. A lot of very good and well-intentioned efforts, but I would argue they still have not been integrated and brought together to the extent they could or should. We're still approaching the problem still a little bit too much in these stovepipes, and that we have the potential at the University of Maryland to really integrate across the geography, the geology, the meteorology, the oceanography, the agricultural, public policy, business, architecture, et cetera. Again, I think that's our responsibility, and I think we're prepared to step up to that.
And the sense I get is that the big piece, the contribution the university can make is really weaving those ties back and forth among the disciplines, between the classroom and research, between the university and government policymakers, that's maybe the contribution that the university can make.
Yes.
I agree. I think we've proven that working in these stovepipes doesn't work. We haven't made the progress, and I think what Tony's laid out and this cross-disciplinary approach is the way to go.
And that's the possibility at the university's research park with the center that's going on there.
And that's why the title of the series is so important. Research does matter, and here at the university, we realize that it's science in service to society.
We obviously have a long way to go in these tough questions, but you've really helped us understand the research that's being done at the university and the impact that it has on one of the state's most valuable resources. That's it for this debut episode of Research Matters. I'm Don Kettle. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you again soon as we bring together more of the university's top-flight researchers working on problems that matter to you.